And without further ado, I want to hand it over to Daniel. Uh, Daniel, all yours.
Thank you, George, and thank you all for tuning in tonight. I have to say that I probably conducted 400 tastings, virtual tasting this year with COVID, being at home, but none of them connected with me emotionally as much as the one tonight because of our Lebanese connection together. What I'd like to do is give you a little bit of a 5 to 10 minute story about how we ended up here, my brother and I. And then I'm going to delve into the winemaking and the wine part of the story that hopefully will be able to connect to the wines that you're tasting tonight. And by all means, call me Danny. I know my name is Daniel, but in Lebanon, everybody calls me Danny. So I'll go with Danny. It's a lot easier. Let me rewind a little bit. I was born in Lebanon, 1965. My brother was born in 69. He's 4 years older. And we grew up like most of you, if not all of you, with a beautiful way of life, teaching us about the wonderful Lebanese hospitality, Lebanese culture, Lebanese food. And that is something that has left a mark on us until today. Our dad, our mom, our parents were wonderful parents. Some of you on this call met them before, so you know what I'm talking about. They taught us, like many of your parents, how to love, how to be helpful, how to have, as they say in Lebanese, atfi. And that is something that is a word that we often take for granted, especially in today's culture, to have atfi, to have tenderness. La tendresse in French is a very similar word. So my dad was actually a very successful entrepreneur growing up. We had a beautiful life. He started his factory at a very young age in the Kellis area. And he actually built the largest manufacturing and wood factory in the Middle East in the 60s and the 70s, furnishing the Casino du Liban, the Phoenicia in 1961, and many other over 90 intercontinental hotels in the Middle East. So we had a very successful entrepreneurial dad who would work all day long from 4 in the morning till 7 or 8 o'clock at night. And I often tell my children, I have 5 children, that what's beautiful about my parents is that they never talked at us, they talked with us. And my dad would spend all day long working, and when he would come from work, he would take the time to sit on the veranda, and for an hour or two, he would tell us stories about how we closed this deal and how we convinced this guy to buy furniture and how we did this and that. And that really inspired my brother and I to be the kind of people we are today. In 1973, when the first civil war started, and Georges Bittar, who's connected here, went to Jamhur with me, so he remembers because I used to come hang out at his house. We were actually the first family to be wounded in the entire Lebanese conflict. The first rocket to ever explode in Lebanon came to our house. It was right at the beginning of the war in 1973. And that obviously left us with not only physical harm, but and a lot of PTSD from it. It taught us to appreciate life and to really value our family bond, which is why my brother and I today, even after all these years, we have an indestructible bond together. People often call us the yin and the yang, where together we're inseparable and we form the full circle. Our mom was actually born in a French island and lived between France and Guadeloupe, which is a French island. And so she actually moved to Lebanon when she was 21 years old or 23 years old. I forgot how old she was. And she didn't speak Lebanese very well. And she met my dad at the airport, who actually happened to be Mr. Lebanon at the time, and fell in love with him. And 2 weeks later, they were married. It was love at first sight. So, that seems very rapid for today's world. But back then, I never forget the story my dad told me. Sabah, the singer, had actually grown up at my dad's home. So to have a chaperone, my dad brought Sabah and went and picked up my mom on the first date, where she barely spoke Lebanese. And even in her later years, she couldn't tell the difference between khayt and hayt. When she said khayt or hayt, we didn't know what she was talking about. Was it khayt or was it hayt? Because for her, it was the same thing. So we grew up, as many Lebanese did, speaking French at home. Obviously went to Jesuit and Jamhur, where we spoke French as well. So when the Civil War started again in 75, we left everything and basically immigrated to Paris. where we lived for about 9 years. And life in France was, in a way, beautiful in some ways and very difficult in other ways. Our dad wasn't able to work, so he was selling properties like so many Lebanese to survive every year or two. And we all heard about the American dream. So at 18 years old, my brother immigrated to the United States, and he decided to go to college here. He was accepted at Berkeley University of California, San Diego. But we were so much in love with the Mediterranean lifestyle of the beautiful sun and the beaches, because we lived about 4 years in Cannes, which reminded us of Lebanon, so that he ended up choosing San Diego, which reminded him very much of Lebanon and the south of France, where we lived for many years. When I turned 18, I followed him, and we both attended the University of California, San Diego. I majored in computer engineering. I was actually, I joined the program when it was the first year they created a computer engineering program. It was in 1984. And my brother majored in electrical engineering. And then our parents were here. You know, as Lebanese, we're very close. We'd like to stick together. And our parents came here, and my dad had basically run out of money. We had to work to pay for our college education. And he brought his last $100,000 with him. And he basically said, it's do or die. I was 21, my brother was 25. I had been offered to be the CDI program manager, Compact Disc Interactive for Philips and Sony, at 21 years old. I was going to move to Holland and Japan to run the program. My brother was accepted at Stanford to get an MBA. But then we looked at my parents and said, we can't leave them. So on the side, I had started a company to make me a little money that computerized networks all over San Diego. So I approached my dad and I asked him to give me his last money and to basically help me start my company and grow it. And I wouldn't leave to Holland and Japan, and I would stay in San Diego and grow the business. He said, if your brother is in, I'm in. So I convinced my brother to abandon his plans to go get an MBA at Stanford. And we both got together, and I basically created the solution, and he commercialized it by selling it. I was 21, he was 25. 10 years later, our company was the 5th best IPO on Wall Street, reaching a valuation of $750 million. And we ended up retiring at the age of 31 for me and 35 for my brother. That's the story in a nutshell. I won't give you the million-dollar details in the between, but I think being Lebanese, you probably already figured it out. It wasn't always easy. You know, we had to make ends meet. We had to do what we can to survive. But most of all, most importantly, our goal wasn't to enrich ourselves. Our goal was to take care of our parents, who had been the most wonderful parents anybody could have wished for. And we were successful in doing it. Now, being an engineer and being a programmer and having done all that in my 20s and computerized almost every hospital in the United States in my 20s, believe it or not, my passion started shifting very quickly to wine. Growing up in France, I remember my dad, the first time we were living in Cannes, you know, my dad was a great, great person, but he was horrible at honeydews. He couldn't even make coffee. If it wasn't that my mom was around, he would starve to death. So I remember one day I'm in Cannes. It was a beautiful day. I was sitting on the couch watching TV. I see my dad carrying boxes and bringing the boxes and stacking them up in the closet. I'm like, I'd never seen my dad carry a box. I went to him and I said, Sean, be seated. What's going on? What are you doing? He looked at me and said, wait till you see this deal I got on this beautiful Cheval Blanc. Now, I was 13 years old. Cheval Blanc is a famous chateau in Saint-Emilion in Bordeaux. And it's a very well-known chateau. And of course, if you speak French, you know Cheval Blanc means white horse. And I had no idea what he was talking about. I looked outside thinking he bought a white horse. I'm like, where is the horse? He goes, no, it's wine. My dad would drink a bottle of wine literally every day, a little bit at lunch, the rest at dinner. And I would sit down with him and we shared wonderful moments where he would get philosophical, talk about life, talk about, you know, the family, talk about the future, talk about politics, talk about whatever he wanted. And these moments really marked me when I was young. And I very much attributed these moments to wine because I would watch him drink wine and he would get calm, he would get philosophical, he would get jovial. And I'm like, wow, you can actually drink a glass of wine and become like that. That's very interesting. So in my early 20s, I started collecting wine. And very quickly, almost every house I owned in my 20s, I converted either a bathroom or a bar or a room into a wine cellar. And I would literally, when I took my company public, I would meet with investors all day. And at night, I would go to bed and I would read about winemaking and I would read about wine. I was consumed by wine. It was something that was just eating up at me. And so when I retired and I was 31 years old, there wasn't a question in my mind that I wanted to become a winemaker. And it wasn't just about collecting wine for me. It wasn't just about drinking it. Of course, I love that. It was really about, making wine. So I spent 8 years while I did do other projects. I started a couple other companies. I, sat on a board of a company that was sold. I started a digital communication wireless company as well that did applications early on in real time in the early 2000s. But my passion wasn't there. And if I can tell you one thing, I've never chased money. I know this may sound weird because we're Lebanese. We like to make money. We're very, money oriented because, it gives us pleasure to make money. But in my case, it was never about the money. The one time I did chase money, I didn't make money. What I did is follow my passion. And every time I followed my passion, it not only was profitable, but I was successful at it. So I spent 8 years studying winemaking, making wine in my garage, visiting every wine region in the world. And what I learned in this 8 years, and this is going to take me to the story of Daou. What I learned is that when it comes to wine, terroir, it's a French word that comes from the word soil, which is terre, really can make or break the quality of your wine. You could be the greatest winemaker in the world. Unless you have the right terroir, you're not going to make great wine. It's that simple. So what did I learn about terroir? Well, I learned that every vineyard in Europe, as well as Lebanon, by the way, by Zahle and other places, share the same soil. Most of the vineyards in Lebanon, as well as most of Europe, Tuscany, France, Burgundy, Bordeaux, the Loire Valley, the Alsace, Champagne, south of England, Austria, Germany, they share one thing in common. They share the same soil. That soil in French is called argilo-calcaire, which in English is called calcareous clay. So what I learned is that these soils really make or break the quality of your wine. So after looking for 8 years, you're going to be surprised by what I'm going to tell you. I couldn't find these soils. So I went on Google one day and I typed in California limestone, thinking maybe I will find a piece of land that has these soils and I will create a wine region. And I saw Paso Robles everywhere, 10,000 pages of Paso Robles this, Paso Robles that. I had no idea where it was. I thought it was in Mexico. I'm like, where is Paso Robles? And then I found out it's in the central coast of California. Well, I did the crazy thing. At 40 years old, which is about 14 years ago or so, I decided to give up my beautiful life in San Diego, where I played golf every day and worked out and wasn't great. It was fit and great shape, which I'm not anymore, and decided to move up to Paso Robles, erect a modular that's 1,000 square foot with no water, no electricity, nothing. And I got there. I lived in a 1,000 square foot modular for the first 2 months, and I planted the first 26 acres myself. And I declared very boldly that I'm going to make a Cabernet that can rival anyone in the world. And I think Gandhi said, first they laughed, then they cried, and then you won. I convinced my brother to do it. He thought at first I was crazy, but then he knows me and he said, if you think you can make the best wine, I'm in. So my brother abandoned everything himself, moved up to Paso. We left our house in San Diego. And at first, I have to tell you honestly, we heard all kind of insults being in Paso. We heard you guys are stupid, you guys are crazy, you guys don't know what you're doing, you're just rich people throwing money left and right, you're planting the wrong variety, you're planting Cabernet Sauvignon, you might as well go north, this is a region for Rhone. But we stuck to our beliefs, and history has always told my brother and I that when we have so many naysayers, we're probably on the right track. So we stuck around, planted the first acreage, opened up our tasting room. And the thing I want to describe to you, though, is that the terroir we found in Paso is arguably the best terroir in the whole world for growing Bordeaux varieties. Now, let me give you some scientific reasons why, because I don't want you to think I'm making an emotional statement because I love my wines. So we talk about terroir, and terroir is two things predominantly. It's soil and it's climate. So soil and climate is going to affect the quality of what wine you make. So we talked about soil. The soil that you find predominantly in all of Europe, in Lebanon, in South Africa as well, is argilo-calcaire, it's calcareous clay. Now, why are these soils so important? For three reasons. First, these soils are going to give you minerality and earthiness that goes beyond just fruit. So these soils are very important because of that. The second reason why these soils are important is because they allow you to dry farm. Other soils don't allow you to dry farm. Why? Because these soils have what's called a limestone subsoil, which traps the rain, the water from the rain in the rainy season, and is able to, like through osmosis, provide moisture to the root zone in order for it to survive. There's a reason why in Europe, they only grow vine in these soils, because in Europe, it is not allowed to actually irrigate. So if you don't have these soils, your vines will die, which is one of the main reasons why in Europe, you will only find vines on these soils because they're able to sustain life for the vine without being irrigated. The third reason why these soils are important is because they allow you to make natural wines. Our wines are made with only two components, our native yeast and nutrition for the yeast, vitamins, to finish the fermentation. So these soils are extremely unique. Now, you probably guessed by now what is the only problem with these soils is you don't find them in California. You will not find them in Napa or Sonoma or San Ynez or Temecula or Santa Barbara County. These soils, the only place you find a larger percentage of these soils, the presence of these soils, is actually on the west side of Paso Robles, which has the exact same soils as Bordeaux. So you can imagine my surprise when I came across that. It was a no-brainer. When I found these soils, I took one look to the soils, and they reminded me exactly of the soils I saw in Bordeaux or Burgundy or most of the regions of France. So I knew I had the jackpot by finding these soils. Let's talk about climate, because climate is a very badly misunderstood subject in Paso Robles. Why? Because Paso is 614,000 acres. Now, how big is that? That is larger than Napa and Sonoma put together. So when you talk about Paso, it's very important to talk about where you are in Paso, because you could be 6 miles from the Pacific Ocean, and it's called Paso, and it is so cold that you cannot grow grapes. Or you could be 35 miles inland from the Pacific Ocean, and it is so warm that you don't want to be there, let alone grow grapes. So you need to understand where you are in Paso Robles. And where we're located, where Daou Mountain is located, Jebel Daou, Daou Mountain, we called it. At first, people thought we were crazy because we got there. We said, okay, we bought a mountain, Jebel Daou, Daou Mountain. They all thought, you're crazy? You're just going to call a mountain after yourself? We said, that's how we do it in Lebanon, it's our mountain and we own it. So it's going to be Daou Mountain. So what's unique about this mountain is, first of all, is the highest elevation vineyard in Paso Robles, 2,200 feet elevation, so roughly about 700 meters. Now, why is that important? If you ask a pilot, they will tell you, when you go up about 1,000 feet, you drop about 5 degrees. Well, we're at 2,200 feet elevation, so it's normal for us to average about 7 to 10 degrees cooler than the rest of Paso. The second reason why this is important is because we actually face the Templeton Gap, which is a tunnel that brings the cold air from the Pacific Ocean. We are actually the only vineyard in California that's at 2,200 feet elevation, but yet only 14 miles from the Pacific Ocean. So if you've ever gone to our winery, you will see that it's windy 24 hours a day. The wind from the Pacific Ocean, where the average temperature is 52 degrees, comes in and always brings out the cold air, which cools down the temperature. So you may ask, how cold is it? So the climate in Paso can be misunderstood. I can't tell you how many times I've heard critics come to Paso and say, it's very warm, it's very hot in Paso. Well, that's because they come to downtown, they stay at a hotel in the middle of summer, and yes, it's hot downtown. And then they walk out of there saying, it's a very hot region. Let me give you some statistics, and you'll understand why we have the perfect climate to ripen in Cabernet Sauvignon. Let's take a look at 2019. Out of the 365 days that year, the number of days 100 degrees or more, which is indicative of what happens, because anytime you get to 100 degrees, you get sunburn, you basically sunburn the grape, you scorch them, you stop producing sugar, and it really degrades the quality of the wine. The number of days at 100 degrees or more, downtown Paso in 2019 was 27. St. Helena and Napa, a beautiful region, received 11 days at 100 degrees in 2019. And in Pauillac, Bordeaux, which is the birthplace of Cabernet Sauvignon, in 2019, received 4 days at 100 degrees. The number of days we saw in the entire 2019 vintage, the entire year for that matter, on Daou Mountain was 0. Not a single day reached 100 degrees. Let's take a look at 2020, just in case we think that it's an aberration. In 2020, very warm year. Many of you live in California, I'm sure. It was actually the third warmest year on records, with 4 heat waves, with fires, devastating the whole state that I'm sure you've experienced. The number of days at 100 degrees or more in Paso Robles was 32 days. In Napa was 16 days in St. Helena. In Calistoga in Napa was way over 20. In Pauillac was 2, where they had a very cold and rainy year. We saw 6 days, and we averaged about 7 to 8 degrees cooler than Napa in 2020 this year, which is one of the reasons we made some of our best wines. So what we found is the perfect climate to achieving ripeness year after year, which is something very rare, because as you all know, you go buy, especially a higher end bottle of wine, what's the first question you ask? What vintage? Was it a good vintage or a bad vintage? Well, there is no guessing in our case. Every vintage is a good vintage. While some vintages are outstanding, every vintage is a great vintage. So we found a place that we call a rare phenomenon. Why is that? Because nowhere on planet Earth will you find a spot that has the soils of Bordeaux and the climate that allows you to achieve ripeness without cooking the grapes year after year consistently. Now, more importantly, what does it mean in the glass? Well, here's what it means. There's an objective way and a subjective way of measuring wine quality. The subjective way is you have 3 critics that taste the wine. One gives it a 90, thinks it's very dark, thinks it's very structured. The other one thinks it's great, it's outstanding, gives it a 95. All these things, while we love ratings because we get very high ratings every year, that's a very subjective way as an engineer of measuring wine quality. I prefer to look at things more objectively than subjectively. Now, how do we do that? Well, to do that, you have to look at something called phenolics. So when you look at a glass of wine, there are 3 things that you do. The first thing that you do is you look at the color of the wine. The second thing that you do is you smell the wine. And the third thing that you do is you taste the wine. And based on the structure of the wine, based on the balance of the wine, it will tell you if the wine can age a long time. It will tell you if the wine is balanced or too extracted. So phenolics are a very scientific and objective way of measuring wine. What else do we know? We know that wines with higher phenolics tend to be superior wines. How do we know that? Well, we know that because of France. What is the difference between a good vintage of France and a bad vintage in Bordeaux? It's very simple. The good vintage has more color, better tannin structure, the wines can age more, better floral bouquet, more bouquet. All these things are part of the phenolic family. As a matter of fact, historically, critics in France, when they review a wine, they will measure phenolics even 20 years ago and write down the phenolics at the bottom of their tastings, because a higher phenolic wine is a superior wine. Well, what I can tell you is we've measured 600 Cabernets from all over the world, from every region, be it Chile, France, Argentina, Napa, Washington, Coonawarra, and the story goes on. We have never found a wine that has phenolics that comes out of Daou Mountain. Never. Now, what does it mean to the consumer? And it's going to bring me to the last point. It means that we're able, we call it approachable luxury. It means we're able to deliver a bottle of wine that drinks like a bottle of wine that sells for 10, 20 times more for a fraction of the price. So in 2013, we released our first estate wines, only 7 years ago. Today, we're the fastest growing winery in the United States, and some say the world. Our Cabernet Sauvignon is the second most sold Cabernet Sauvignon in the United States. Our Pessimist red blend is the second most sold red blend in the United States. Our rosé, which we introduced 5 months ago, is the #1 sold domestic rosé in the United States. Now, what do you attribute to that? Attribute it to great terroir, attribute it to high phenolics. I can tell you, and we've done blind tastings 1,000 times, $20 Cabernet that you find on the market has more phenolics than a bottle of wine that's in Napa for $200 and $300. And if people don't believe me, I tell them, go buy a bottle of wine and put it next to those. You'll see for yourself. And I can tell you that that has caused serious disruption in the wine industry, because people are figuring out that you can buy a bottle of wine that sells for $20 and $50, but it drinks better than a bottle of wine that sells for $300, which is one of the reasons our winery has gone viral very quickly. Today, we're in the 50 states domestically. We're in 32 countries internationally. By next year, we expect to be in 90 countries, distributing our wines all over the world. We're in Asia, we're in Europe. Believe it or not, France even orders pallets at a time and sells our wines, which is something that's rarely ever happened with California wines, because they tend to be too jammy for the European palate. But our wines tend to have minerality. They incorporate a lot of the European influence with great acidity that comes from the soil. So, we're proud of the success. We're very blessed and thankful that it's happened. We love what we do. And I hope you enjoyed the wines. I'm going to tell you a bit about the wines you're having today. I think you're having 2 wines. Am I correct, George? I think you're having the Chardonnay Reserve, correct?
Yes, the Chardonnay Reserve, and then the Soul of the Line.
Soul of the Line. So I'll start with the Chardonnay. Chardonnay is often a wine you don't think of Paso Robles when you think of Chardonnay. You think of Sonoma County, or you think of Santa Barbara County. But in reality, Paso Robles is the only place that actually has the same soils as Burgundy. So our Chardonnay, especially the Reserve, is extremely successful because it incorporates beautiful minerality. It incorporates, look at the golden color. So we're able to achieve ripeness. So the phenolics, even in the white wines, are higher. There's no acidification. There is no manipulation. There's no adding sugar. It is made in the most natural way possible. It's not a big production. The Chardonnay Reserve tend to be a smaller production. It's distributed in 50 states as well as the rest of the countries we're in internationally. It's aged in 50% new French oak. And this Chardonnay does not come from our vineyard. We have a Chardonnay that comes from our estate. We're planted to 98% Bordeaux varieties and only 2% Chardonnay. But this is a special, actually 2 vineyards, very special, that I've been working with for now 12 years. They're located about 8 or 9 miles from the Pacific Ocean. So that cold weather really allows to have that crisp acidity, even though the wine undergoes what's called malolactic fermentation to really transform the malic acid into lactic acid to make the wine softer. So it's a very, very vineyard designate wine. This is why it says on the bottle, Wood Creek District, because it's a district that's very close to the Pacific Ocean. We'll talk about the Soul of the Line in a second. First, I want to tell you about our estate. So today, we own close to 700 acres in the Adelaide district of Paso Robles. We have close to 200 acres of vines planted, and we're planting another 100 acres in the next 2 to 3 years. Our winery receives about 50,000 visitors a year. And since the day we opened, we sign up about 200 new club members every month. The wines that we sell at the winery, we tend to never sell outside of the winery. The wines we sell in the wholesale market, we never sell at the winery, with one exception, the Soul of the Line, which brings me to this wine that's very unique. Well, first, the name, the Soul of the Line. Why is it called Soul of the Line? As I mentioned before, we grew up with incredible parents. Our dad told us so many stories that inspired us to be who we are today. And about 20 years ago, when I retired from the first company, I didn't want my children one day to forget who their grandparents were. I'm sure you run into this. I'm sure if you have children, you know what I'm talking about. So often I meet people and I tell them, what's your ethnic background? They say, I don't know. Who are your grandparents? I don't know. Who are your great-grandparents? I don't know either. And in Lebanon, بيقولوا اللي بينسى أصله ما عنده أصل, right? So we wanted our children, our future generations to always know what their ancestry was and where they came from. So I hired this lady and I told her, spend a year with our dad. Listen to him to tell you all the stories we grew up with and put them in a book. So this lady that we hired spent a year with my dad. And after a year, she composed the entire book that had all the stories that we grew up listening to. And then at the end of the book, she looked at them and said, "What would you like the book to be called?" My dad didn't even hesitate. He said, "Soul of a Lion." She said, "Why Soul of a Lion?" He said, "Because our family's been through a lot of trials and tribulation. We've been at the bottom and we've been at the top a couple times in our lives. But if there's one thing I want my children to know is that when you're down at the bottom, don't give up and come back roaring with the soul of a lion." مثل الأسد يعني عربي. So that inspired us to call our best wine after our dad, Soul of a Lion. The wine is very unique. I created a special barrel just for this wine, which takes 5 years to cure in France. So it takes 9 years to make this wine. It's 5 years for the barrel, 1 year in the vineyard, 2 years in the barrel, the wine aging, and almost 1 year in the bottle before it's released. This wine has one of the highest phenolics, Cabernet Sauvignon, in the world, year after year. And it's caused serious disruption. I can't share with you all the details, but I can tell you, this wine has outsold 2 years in a row in California, every Napa blue chip and every first growth from France. That's according to the largest distributor in the world, who represents us, Southern Wine Spirits. Now, why? You may ask why. Well, first, because it's a great wine that's received ratings year after year in the 95 to 99 range on a yearly basis. But two, because it's affordable. Because a wine that sells for $125 or $150, depending on where you are in California, is nothing compared to the wines that sell for 2 to 3 or 4 times more. And when people try this wine, they just don't want to buy the others anymore. So it's put a real dent in the wine industry in California. It's a wine that's changed the course of Paso forever. It's aged in 100% new French oak. And we don't even press the grapes. The grapes are basically done through gravity. So the yields are very small. It's not a big production yet, but it's not small either. We usually make around 3,000 cases of wine per year on this wine, which for a high-end wine is considered to be, kind of on the upper end. And it's a wine that really literally sells out for us a few months after release every year. Try it. It's the best way to know how good it is. It's hard for me to put it into words because you can probably drink the wine and tell for yourself. But it's a wine that will change the way you look at Cabernet Sauvignon because, phonetically speaking, it dwarfs every other Cabernet Sauvignon from all over the world. And those are numbers that we have, that we measured, that we know for a fact are what we know they are. So, we love what we do. I have 5 children. 4 of them are involved in the wine business. My oldest daughter, Catherine, she's 29 years old. She handles the social media and brand ambassador. My daughter, Lizzie, is getting 3 masters in Europe. She got her degree in Cal Poly and now is getting a master's from the University of Tarragona, from the University of Bordeaux, and the University of Porto. And she'll be back next year to make wine with me. And she is about as addicted as I am to winemaking and wine. My daughter, Anna, came back from college and is running our vineyard right now. She's 24 years old. My son, Joseph, is at Washington State and studying winemaking and enology. And he's super talented. He hopes to join the business, not only the winemaking, but on the business side, eventually to help run it. And then I have a 17-year-old who hasn't decided what to do yet, but she's got a better palate than all of us. So I wouldn't be surprised if she ends up in the wine industry. So not only are we family owned and family operated, which is a very rare thing because most wineries in California, even if they're family owned, you don't have the owner making the wine. And I am the winemaker. I make all the wines. But we're also multi-generational. My children also are becoming winemakers. So we love the life that we created. We love wine. And we made some wonderful friends. It's a great industry. And we're excited about the future.